Life with Dad had always been simple, predictable. After Mom passed 5 years ago, it was just the two of us in our cozy townhouse on the edge of the city. He ran a small architecture firm, designing homes that were as warm and inviting as the one we lived in. I was his world, and he was mine. But all of that started to change when Lila entered our lives. Dad met her at an art gallery. She was striking, an elegant woman with jet black hair, piercing blue eyes, and a charisma that drew people to her like moths to a flame. He told me about her one evening over dinner, his eyes lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Elliot," he said, his voice tinged with excitement, "I think I've met someone really special." I forced a smile, though unease already churned in my stomach. "That's great, Dad," I replied. "When do I get to meet her?" When I finally met Lila, I wanted to believe she was everything Dad said she was. She was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in me. She asked about my hobbies, my schoolwork, even the graphic novel I was working on. Dad watched us with such hope in his eyes that I tried my best to warm up to her. But something about her felt wrong. It wasn't anything she said or did directly, at least not at first. It was more the way she moved, calculated and deliberate, like she was always one step ahead of the conversation. And there were moments when I caught her watching me, her smile a little too sharp, her gaze lingering just a little too long. Still, I kept my doubts to myself. Dad was happy for the first time in years, and I wasn't about to ruin that for him. Things escalated quickly. Within 6 months, Dad proposed to Lila. He told me over breakfast one Saturday morning, holding her hand as she beamed across the table. "Elliot," Dad said, his voice filled with emotion, "Lila and I are getting married. She's going to be a part of our family." I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. That's great," I managed, my voice thin. Lila reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "I know this might be a big adjustment for you," she said, her tone syrupy sweet. "But I promise, I'll do everything I can to make this transition as smooth as possible." I nodded, forcing a smile. But in that moment, I felt the same unease I'd had the first time I met her, only now it was sharper, more urgent. The first cracks in Lila's mask appeared a few weeks after the engagement. Dad was away on a business trip, and Lila was staying with me to keep me company. It started innocently enough, small criticisms about the way I cleaned my room or left my shoes by the door. But by the second night, her tone had shifted. "You're going to have to step up, Elliot," she said, her voice sharp as she watched me from the kitchen doorway. "Once I'm your stepmother, there will be no room for laziness in this house." Her words stung, but I bit my tongue. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me upset. When Dad returned, Lila was all smiles again, her voice dripping with affection as she told him how wonderful I'd been while he was gone. But I noticed something shift in her gaze when she looked at me, a silent warning that only I seemed to catch. Over the next few months, the pieces of Lila's true nature began to fall into place. She made subtle changes to our home, redecorating without asking Dad's opinion, rearranging furniture, and even getting rid of some of Mom's old things. "She just wants to make the place feel like home," Dad explained when I confronted him. "You have to give her a chance." But it wasn't just the house. She started isolating Dad from his friends, subtly discouraging him from meeting them for drinks or inviting them over for dinner. And when she thought no one was watching, her veneer of kindness would slip, revealing a coldness that made my skin crawl. I tried to talk to Dad about it, but he always brushed me off. "Elliot, she's under a lot of stress with the wedding planning," he'd say. "She means well. You'll see." One night, I overheard a phone conversation that changed everything. It was late, and I'd gotten up to get a glass of water. As I passed Lila's study, I heard her speaking in a low, urgent tone. "Don't worry," she said, her voice sharp and precise. "Everything is in place. Once we're married, the assets will transfer automatically. He won't suspect a thing." My blood ran cold. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear more. "No, the son isn't a problem," she continued. "He's just a kid. If he starts asking questions, I'll handle him. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. What assets? What was she planning? And who was she talking to? The next day, while Lila was out, I decided to investigate. Her study was locked, but I knew where she kept the spare key. Inside, I found a file labeled Preston Estate. My hands shook as I opened it. The documents were damning: financial records, a new will naming Lila as the primary beneficiary, and life insurance policies worth millions. But the most chilling item was a letter addressed to someone named Marcus. It detailed a plan to make my father's death look like an accident, complete with instructions on how to stage it. I felt sick. Lila wasn't just manipulative, she was dangerous. And Dad had no idea. I spent the next few days trying to figure out how to tell him. If I confronted Lila directly, she'd deny everything and find a way to twist it back on me. I needed to wait for the right moment. That moment came at the wedding. The ceremony was held in a grand cathedral, filled with family, friends, and colleagues. Dad looked happier than I'd seen him in years, standing at the altar in his tailored suit. Lila was radiant in her gown, her smile wide and confident. As the officiant began the ceremony, I could feel my hands trembling. My chest was tight, my breathing shallow. When he said the words I'd been dreading, "If anyone has reason why these two should not be joined in matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace," I stood. "I do." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me, including Dad's, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. "Elliot," he said softly. "What are you doing?" I swallowed hard, my voice shaking as I spoke. "Dad, you can't marry her. She's lying to you. She's using you." Lila's expression darkened. "Elliot, that's enough," she said, her voice icy. "This is not the time." "No," I interrupted, my voice rising. "You've been planning this for months. I found the will, the insurance policies. You're planning to kill him." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Dad's face paled as he looked at me, then at Lila. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice trembling. Lila opened her mouth to respond, but the mask had slipped. Her eyes were cold, calculating, as she realized the room was against her. Without a word, she turned and bolted for the door. The police caught her later that evening. The evidence I'd gathered was enough to ensure she couldn't talk her way out of it. Her accomplice, Marcus, was arrested a week later. They both confessed to everything. In the weeks that followed, Dad and I worked to rebuild our lives. He apologized over and over for not seeing Lila's true nature, but I told him it wasn't his fault. We both wanted to believe in her, and she used that against us. Now, every evening when we sit down for dinner or play chess in the living room, I'm reminded of how close we came to losing everything. And every time Dad looks at me and says, "Thank you, Elliot, I know I did the right thing."